Welcome to Clued in Mystery. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brooke, and we both love mystery.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Sarah. Today we're going to discuss another modern great.
That's right. And we are going to discuss Mick Herron, who earlier this year was awarded the Diamond Dagger from the Crime Writers Association. So I will give us a little introduction and then I look forward to speaking about his career with you. Mick Herron spent his early years living with his parents, a nursery school teacher and an optician, and five siblings above his father's optician's shop in Newcastle upon Tyne. After earning a degree in English from Oxford, he settled in that city and commuted to London for work as a sub editor of an employment law journal. It was during that commute that he began writing what would become his first novel, Down Cemetery Road, which was published in 2003 and features Zoe Beam, a private detective. After writing four novels in that series and releasing a standalone novel, he shifted his focus to the British spy services and wrote Slow Horses. Released in 2010, the book sold poorly and his publisher declined to release the second book. His agent, however, persuaded the US distributor to publish that book, and it ended up earning the Crime Writers Association 2013 Gold Dagger. He continued writing and commuting, and it wasn't until around the time of the fourth book in the series, when that was published, that he quit his job to write full time. Apple Plus eventually picked up the TV rights to both series, and Slow Horses hit the streaming service in April 2022 and introduced viewers to Jackson Lamb. I would argue that this is some of the best content on screen right now, and I am sure I'm not alone in saying that I am looking forward to the Zoe Beam series later this month. Throughout his career, Herron's writing has been recognized, with Slow Horses longlisted for the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger in 2010, and several subsequent books in the series shortlisted or winning the same award. And the second book in the series, Dead Lions, won the Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger in 2013 for Best Crime Novel. And as with Slow Horses, other books in that series either were shortlisted or won that same category. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he received the Diamond Dagger this year for lifetime contribution from the Crime Writers Association. And in 2024, he was appointed to the Royal Society of Literature. So, Brooke, I think Mick Herron is our first modern great who is still writing. Have you had a chance to read anything of his?
Well, first, thank you so much for that summary, Sarah. You found some tidbits and nuggets about his life that I wasn't able to track down, so that was really really fun to learn about. Yes, I am in the middle of Slow Horses now. And I've told you before that we don't have Apple TV. So I'm so jealous that you have always talked about how great the series is. And now I'm reading the first book and I'm about halfway through.
Oh, that's so great. So I hadn't read any of his books until 2022 when the series aired on Apple TV. And actually, I don't think it was until maybe 2023 or even last year that I started reading the series. I have to say, it is adapted so well. It really sticks true to the source material. And I'm curious to hear what you think about the characters, having not seen them on screen.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a fun contrast. Um, well, I think that the setup is so refreshing because unlike any other kind of spy fiction, these guys are not the perfect 007 where they can do no wrong. They can, everything 007 says is perfect, every action he makes. These are the cast offs, essentially. They're the misfits. And I think it's wonderful to think about the fact that every industry has these, there's this subset that they're not the stars, and yet they still, of course, uh, can do heroic things. And so I really enjoy that. In starting a new series, sometimes it takes a long part of the book before you start to identify names and characters, and like you start to place them in your head. And especially because I listened to this, I am listening to this in audio, and I do so very often. It's sometimes hard to keep characters straight, but I have not had that experience at all in Slow Horses. He does a really good job of delineating characters, and I can't really put my finger on how he does it, but I know very clearly who's who.
Yeah, that's a great observation. They are very, as you say, very distinct. Each character, I think he just must assign this is the way that this character speaks or this character moves or acts, and so just builds on that. The books are, I think, very descriptive. It's very easy to picture kind of where the characters are, but they're also really funny.
Very funny. Yes. And I read that one of the reasons why book two wasn't picked up is that people were having a hard time deciding. I thought this was funny. They didn't know if this was a comedy or a drama. And I thought, okay, I don't think it goes clear to the level of comedy. It's strange to think of a light-hearted spy thriller, but
Hmm.
there are moments of levity, and there, I find myself laughing out loud.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not funny, like it's not farcical, right? So we're not talking about Get Smart or um, something along those lines. It this is serious, right? It's a serious book, but there is just this, you have to ease some of that tension, and he does that with
Mhm.
primarily with Jackson Lamb and the way that he just treats everybody else. He's just this horrible, horrible character in terms of the way that he interacts with the people who work for him, the people he works for. He's just rude.
Yes, absolutely. And Aaron talks about the fact that he's essentially talking about life as an office worker. These people don't want to
Hmm.
be office workers because they used to be MI5 spies in the action, but now they're basically paper pushers. And he has said, like, I know a lot about that because I've worked in offices, and I know what it's like for people to not be satisfied with their work. And so it's just putting that into, the spy world. And there is a lot of office humor. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
that, and that, chatting around the water cooler, and everybody's poking fun at the boss or whatever, and you get that feeling, and you have to remember, like, oh yeah, people in every job description do this, whether or not they want to be there or not.
And I think that's part of the real appeal of the series, right? Is that I I'm not a spy. I am never going to be a spy. I don't know what that work is like, but as you say, I do know what working in an office is like. And so I can identify with those experiences that the characters have. And so I think that's part of the appeal. I did read an interview where he was quite clear that the experiences that he gives to his characters with respect to having this horrible boss, that is not an experience that he shares with them. But I think in his work working on this law journal, um, he would have seen lots of examples of very bad bosses.
And you said, Sarah, that you don't know anything about being a spy, and of course, neither do I. And Heron even says that he would make an awful spy. He doesn't own a smartphone, and he doesn't have Wi Fi at home, which is a little ironic considering what he writes. But I thought that was a really unique fact about him.
Yeah, I saw that as well. And he does make a point of in interviews saying that I am not a spy, and I've made up all of this. This is fiction, right? And I don't think he necessarily wants to be 100% accurate with respect to the way things work, because he just wants to write about this world that he's created.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, The New Yorker did call him the heir to John le Carré and the best spy novelist of his generation. But unlike Le Carre, Herron never worked in intelligence, like you
Hmm.
said, and he approaches it from the outside looking in. And so I think it's really high honors to be associated with, his predecessors in that way, but it is coming at it from a different angle. And I find it more accessible and enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree. We have talked before about people who are um, experienced in a particular profession, then writing about characters with that similar background as the sleuths. And there's a risk that you're going to weigh down the story with details that, of course, you know, because you're an expert in this field, but aren't necessarily things that push the story forward. And we don't get any of that
Mhm.
with Heron's writing.
So, Sarah, in your research on Mick Herron, did you discover any information on how he writes and how he puts together his stories?
Yeah, I did. I found a couple of interviews where he talks a little bit about that. He's not very much of a plotter, and he admits to that. He says, a certain number of plot points are embedded in the novel before I start writing it. Occasionally, a particular twist is the reason for writing a book in the first place, but I don't plot a book minutely before writing it, and a lot of changes take place along the way. So some of those twists will have occurred to me at about the same point in the novel that they're dropped on the reader.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And then in another article, he said, I wish I could more adequately plan. He says, I have a vague notion of what I'm up to. I know what scenes I'm writing, which characters are involved, but the planning tends to happen on the page. Often, what might appear as a clever plot twist is really when I've written myself into a corner and I need to get myself out of it.
I can relate to those notions that he expresses because I too am not much of a planner when I'm writing.
I identified with that as well.
I was struck by really how relatively short his career has been to reach the heights that it has. I mean, Slow Horses was published in 2010. So his first series was just published in the early 2000s, making his career really only about 20 years long as far as publishing. And then to, get the Diamond Dagger and get these awards, it's really quite short in comparison to some of the other people that we talked about that maybe didn't reach that level of success until 30 or 40 years into their career.
Well, and I think he credits that with just having some good fortune come his way. So when the second book in the Slow Horses series wasn't picked up by his British publisher, I think he just was like, well, I'll just keep writing these because I like the stories, right? And I'm enjoying them, and this is a fine way to pass the time on the train between Oxford and London. Uh, and he talks about this in an interview. I didn't pull out a quote, but he does talk about that he was fine with that, right? Like that was he had accepted that he was never going to be a bestseller. And then it just was, his book catching the eye of the right editor or the right person that got it into the hands of someone else that kind of started this chain reaction and ended with the series on Apple TV. Um, and he, in all of the interviews that I read with him, he just seems to be this very down to earth, humble, even guy who just loves writing and
Mhm.
is thrilled that people are enjoying his stories. So I read the first book in the Zoe Beam series, and it's also very good, right? Like it doesn't feel like a first novel. It'll be really interesting to see how it's adapted because it was written. I think it was, probably written, or he's probably started writing it very early 2000s. And so if they don't set it then, if they set it now, there's some changes that they can make to just acknowledge the state of the world that we're in. It's also good. It doesn't read, sometimes a first novel reads like a first novel, and this did not. Even reading Slow Horses, it's hard to see why it wasn't immediately successful because I think it is so good.
Mhm, mhm. And I do think there's a little bit of that, how is this a spy thriller with the levity, which we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
I think that it was a different time, and maybe now we're a little bit more used to stories that have a little bit more of that personal touch, and we get to see the interactions more intimately of the characters. That feels like something kind of now. And maybe
Mhm.
10, 15 years ago we weren't really ready for that, because I agree, like reading it as the first time now, I'm thinking I'm surprised that this just wasn't just runaway hit off the bat.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, Brooke. It just might not have been the right time, and it probably wasn't positioned right.
Hmm.
So when that second book came out, um, and his US publisher submitted it for the Crime Writers Association award, I think that did give him a little bit of recognition because it won the Best Crime Novel award, which is a very prestigious award to win. And then you look at the list of all of the awards that his books have been nominated for and that they've won. I think the people who read them recognize them as being very, very good. It probably just wasn't positioned the right way to attract readers' attention.
Right, the correct audience for the book. I will say, and reading it now, I already know that the television series exists. So even though I haven't seen it, I'm aware that it exists. The first few chapters in my mind were like written for television, because you're introduced to each character one at a time, very much like when you're watching a series. It's like, okay,
Hmm.
here you're meeting the main male character, and here's the main female character, for instance. And then when they finally you all see them in the ensemble room together, he I'm sure he wasn't doing that intentionally, but I could see how adapted really well to the screen. Um, and I will also say that not a lot happens in the first quarter of that book, because you're just like meeting each person and you're learning about their background. And that could have been a turn off for audiences as
Hmm.
well. I don't know, because it's not fast paced 007 shooting guns and, driving fast cars. You're finding out about these people's internal lives, and then it culminates into, what happens, that they all have to work together.
Yeah, you're right. It may be an example of something that needed that television treatment to attract readers. Um, anyway, I if you ever get the chance, Brooke, I do highly, highly recommend that you watch the series because I'm sure you will just absolutely fall in love with it. And each um, series is only, or each season is only about 6 episodes, so it's not, it doesn't drag out too much. It's perfect in terms of the amount of content, I think. So, Brooke, you earlier mentioned the comparison that has been made between Mick Herron and John le Carre. And we've talked before where other authors have taken up a story and continued it, whether it's with Sherlock Holmes or James Bond. And um, Mick Herron has a very firm stance about continuation novels. I would do everything in my power to prevent any such thing ever happening. It fills me with horror. I don't see why it's so hard for publishers to accept that there's dangers in trying to extend the life of a series, turning it into a franchise rather than the creation of a particular author. It's part of the commodification of literature, which is one of the least attractive aspects of it. And he said he would never accept an offer to write a Bond novel.
How fascinating. I mean, you have to respect that, right? you have to understand where he's coming from, and I do. I get that, and that idea of the it being a commodity and just a commercial endeavor. I really
Hmm.
respect his that stance. And this is coming from someone who has commercialized his own work.
Hmm.
But the idea of then somebody else capitalizing it on it is, he calls it like a horror.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was a really interesting um, position to be so firm about. And we've talked before about some authors, Sue Grafton not wanting even a television version um, of her
Mhm.
series, and having died without finishing her series. And so that's an example of something that would be a very easy thing to uh, to finish up, but because she was so adamant, I don't think we will ever see a conclusion to that series.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I would imagine that Sue Grafton and Mick Herron would be on the same page of this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I will mention that he has written several short stories as well as some novellas that are standalone and some that are in the Slow Horses world. And so, if there's some that provide a little bit of backstory about some of the characters, or meet them before you meet them formally in the series. And I always enjoy when authors do that. I think that that is it's such a treat as a reader to just get that little bit more. And I appreciate that he doesn't stretch that out into a whole novel, but he just tells a little bit of information that keeps the reader engaged in the world.
Yeah, I think so too. It feels like you're getting a peek inside their process a little bit, it almost like you're seeing the behind the scenes information, and they can be a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Well, Sarah, thank you for doing this research, and so we can learn a little bit more about Mick Herron, a modern great.
It was a lot of fun, Brooke, and it was a lot of fun to chat about him with you. And like I said, if you ever get the chance, highly recommend watching the screen version of Slow Horses.
That sounds great. And listeners, if you've seen Slow Horses, let us know. Drop us an email or reach out to us on social media. We would love to have you join our semi monthly newsletter, the Clued In Chronicle. We'll link that in the show notes. But until next time, thanks for joining us on Clued In Mystery. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Sarah, and we both love mystery. Clued in Mystery is written and produced by Brooke Peterson and Sarah M. Stephen. Music is by Shane Ivers. If you liked what you heard, please consider telling a friend, leaving a review, or subscribing with your favorite podcast listening app. Visit our website to sign up for our newsletter, The Clued In Chronicle, and get mystery news, podcast updates, and bonus episodes. We're on social media at Clued In Mystery.